The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition took place here in Chicago, also known as the World's Fair. It was one of the most grand events of all humanity. It boasts great architecture, science, new technology, and some of the greatest people in the history of humanity. But lurking in the shadows was something that would stain America's history forever. The World's Columbian Exposition, also known as the 1893 World's Fair, took place here in Chicago from May 1st, I believe, to October 30th. It was a grand event. Obviously, it spanned for so long. Basically, it was a fair that brought the entire world of innovation together. It brought different foods, cultures, technologies, science, a bunch of different things all into the city. It spanned across the city. It was a grand thing. It was mostly like on the south side-ish, but it was a great thing. It was probably the best, I think, in my opinion, the best thing that could take place here in humanity, was to bring the entire world together and show off some of the greatest things we've been able to achieve, throughout time. During this fair, they had the grandest architecture. I mean, some of these buildings were, amazingly built. There's a debate on whether these buildings were here before or if they were built, but they are pretty grand. They have some great architecture, statues. There was some innovating things like sidewalks that moved, things like that could get you around. They had these grand ponds where you could look out over them, and canals that could take you across. It was an amazing thing. It was almost like All-Star Weekend for like the world. The whole world would pull up and see different things. It also boasts some of the greatest people throughout humanity, bro. This place had, the people who attended this event, the fact that, Chicago wasn't as big as it is now, but the fact that you could even get anywhere near some of these people who were there. Some of these people include President Grover Cleveland, 22nd, 24th President of the United States. Helen Keller, bro, the deaf and blind lady who ended up being like an author. We've all learned about Helen Keller. But yes, she was here in Chicago, bro. We have people like Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, we all know, has contributed to the light bulb. And he was here. He showcased something that ended up showing motion pictures like today type thing. It was like some groundbreaking technology at the time. But Thomas Edison was in the building. Frederick Douglass was in the building. Frederick Douglass was here in Chicago. He gave a great speech. Buffalo Bill Cody, who was a pretty big showman at the time. He was a great showman, like actor, type guy. The stars were out, bro. Everybody was in the building. And even Nikola Tesla. Tesla was there, bro. Nikola Tesla was there. He was here in Chicago, bro. Like, when I tell you the greatest stuff of humanity was here in Chicago during this 1893 World's Fair, bro, it was busting. But there was also a dark side about this World's Fair now. It wasn't all peaches and dandy. It was some dark stuff going on. One of those things was the first serial killer America's ever witnessed, at least, captured. You know what I'm saying? H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes. Actually, that wasn't even H.H. Holmes' real name. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett on May 16th, 1861. Decent little life. Some decent parents. They were some pretty strong Methodists. He didn't have like the worst life. He was described as pretty charmful and intelligent. And he had like a pretty infatuation with like death and, animals and things like that, which we know now are kind of like some kind of tales of like early serial killer stages, right? He led a pretty decent life, but he wasn't very popular. He goes on to go to med school at the University of Michigan. It's med school, so you're learning about the bodies and different things like that. But this is where he kind of picks up on like the dark side of things. He gets into a little bit of insurance fraud, right? So he starts doing this insurance fraud. Who knows why he picked it up, but he did it. He was basically faking deaths of cadavers and collecting the insurance money for them. A little fraud. He didn't get caught on it, but he was getting by. So he did his little fraud thing, and after finishing medical school, he ended up moving to Chicago. When he moves to Chicago, he acquires a pharmacy. He purchases this pharmacy, and it does pretty well, as any pharmacy would. He was able to then acquire a hotel, a piece of property to build a hotel during the 1893 World's Fair. Now, this is where things get tricky. He gets this land and he builds this hotel. Subsequently enough, this land is in this little small town of Inglewood, which is today's Inglewood that we know of in Chicago. And it specifically was on 63rd and Wallace. I think now there's a United States Post Office there, but on 63rd and Wallace, he acquires this land and builds this hotel. This hotel would later become the Murder Castle. So during the 1893 World's Fair, obviously there's a ton of amount of tourists, right? So it wasn't very hard for this charming, intelligent guy who was also a multi-business owner at that time to, be able to get guests and, young women and pretty women to be able to come stay at his hotel from all over the world. People needed a place to stay. He'd be like, yeah, you can stay with me. Or he'd promise people who needed some employment, mostly young women. Yeah, you could come and, you can work for me. So you can stay here. Things are all good, blah, blah, blah. And now how he'd get you is he'd give you one of these rooms that were secretly equipped, that had secret passageways connected to them, airtight for gas chambers, and soundproof for torture. So these people were blindly getting rooms, probably sometimes for free or at very discounted rates, and didn't know that they would be their last time checking into these rooms or the last time checking into a hotel at all. So he'd give these people these rooms, and he'd use things like the gas chambers connected to them to give you a depth, and it'd be a soundproof room so no one could hear you screaming. Or he'd use a secret passageway and come up from behind or do whatever he needed to do to kill you. And he did things like torture his victims. He would also dismember his victims after murder to get rid of their bodies and things like that. So it was just some gruesome torture stuff, bro. Like, you wouldn't wish on anyone. He began to become very suspicious around to some of his colleagues and employees. And that's kind of where things tripped him up, was that, him being very suspicious, it would end up, launching an investigation on this man. Because why was he always acting suspicious? He had some shisty antics with his business practices. He wasn't the best businessman, obviously. So people kind of already built a rapport with him being very shisty. And so he also had some victims that escaped. Some victims didn't all perish. And that was one of his biggest downfalls as well. So after the investigation was launched and some testimonial from some of these victims who did escape, he started to get very, very sloppy with his antics, and he ended up being arrested on charges of multiple murders. H. Holmes was not very apologetic about anything. Once he was convicted of these murders, he didn't really seem to care. He didn't really seem to, care if anybody knew what he did. He gave multiple confessions about what he did. He didn't want to hide it. And it was just a sad way to stain something as grand as the 1893 World's Fair. Because the 1893 World's Fair, some of these stars and innovation that was brought out there was, it was second to none. So it really shocked America to hear that during this time and so close to all of this stuff that was going on, that in the back skirts of it all were murders, several murders taking place. In 1896, he was actually convicted of multiple murders and executed to death by hanging. And it just marks something that really, really stains America's history. The World's Fair it's just sad, bro, how, Chicago's history could be so great, but also so cursed at the same time. And it was one of those events you don't really learn about in school. So when I learned about it, man, I really thought I had to share everything with you guys. So there you have it, guys. H.H. Holmes, America's first serial killer during the 1893 World's Fair. The Murder Castle, 63rd and Wallace. Today's Inglewood, then's Inglewood. It's a great piece of history, guys. If you guys want to hear any more topics like this, make sure you guys hit the comments. Let me know what you guys want to hear. Let me know if you guys want me to talk about any more things, do any more videos on some stuff you might have heard. If you guys like what you see, like, comment, subscribe. It really helps the channel. It really helps me make more videos and things like that for you guys. It's your boy Zoe the Session. We're signing out.